So
You can probably pause the recording,
yeah.
or stop it. It's the, yep.
Okay. I think we'll go ahead and get going. Doesn't look like anybody new has come in the last couple of minutes. So welcome everyone and Happy New Year. I guess you see more than the top of my head here. Just a couple of things as we get going. As I mentioned before, if you could please stay muted unless I ask to see if you can hear me or something like that. But you know, that rustling papers, TVs, dog barking, things like that can be a little bit interrupted. So that's always a little more peaceful if we do it that way. Please put your questions in the comments. We can, I'll try to keep an eye on the comments as we go along and answer them. If I can, otherwise, we'll definitely make sure they all get answered by the end of the program. We're going to have a little drawing at the end of the presentation. I have the number already on this little post-it note. I'll have you all put numbers in at the end. And then we also have a little freebie for everybody, and I will send an email to everybody who attended on how to pick up your little freebie, and I'll tell you what it is later in the program when we get to it. And then also we have some perennial seeds that have been donated and some that have been ordered, and they aren't here yet except for the donated ones. So these are all for perennials. They're all supposed to be here by Wednesday, so I'll get them packaged up. And again, I'll put that in an email to everybody, as well as a link to this presentation that you can rewatch or share with your friends. So I think that'll do. I'm going to just move that down here. Just kind of get my screen arranged so I can see what's going on here. Okay. So does everybody, just somebody type in the chat if you can see the pretty flowers on the screen. And I'll make sure you're seeing what I'm seeing. Yay, thank you. We have an answer. All right, we'll get going here. Again, welcome. Happy New Year. So happy to be starting over again with 2022. Get some seeds ready to start. This is always, it seems like a slow time, but it's kind of a good time for gardeners because we're still in the planting stages, and now we can starting some seeds. In this presentation, you will learn, we're going to talk about basic seed starting and equipment that you need, techniques for flowering perennials from all over the world, and we're going to talk about native Michigan perennials and perennial food crops. We're going to talk about a handful of biennials that we kind of can treat like perennials. And then we'll talk about troubleshooting if we have any issues. First of all, we're going to kind of go through a list of equipment that you need for seed starting. Seed starting mix, probably along with lighting, is the most important thing that you can get. You want it to be high quality and it's usually ground pretty fine. And again, I'm going to go into that a little bit later, but this is one place where you don't want to cheap out. You can use yogurt cups, and you do everything else as frugally as possible, but you don't want to cheap out on your seed starting mix or any soil for plants. You need some Either nursery flats are handy with and without drainage holes. The ones without drainage holes you use to, so you can put your flats inside them and put water in the bottom and bottom water your seedlings. If you want to use domes, clear plastic domes to fit over them, you can. It's good to have for inside the flats, cell packs or pots of various sizes, peat pots, any type of pot that you want to use. Peat pots aren't my favorite because if they are in, especially for something like this, because if they're in there for a long time, they could start to mold. You don't get that so much with plastic. Peat pots have their place, and there are a couple of perennials that don't like to be transplanted that they might work well for. Again, recycled's okay. You can use yogurt cups, deli containers, cottage cheese containers, whatever you have. And just to make sure that you drill or cut drainage holes in them. Heat mats are really great. Most seeds, the germination rate is improved if they have some bottom warmth. Heat mats generally are about 70 degrees, but you can also buy thermostats to go with them that help if you want a little more control. We'll go over that a little bit too in the later. Watering options, you have to be able to water your flats very gently, either from the bottom, as I pointed out earlier, or a very gentle spray. It's good to have a whisper fan or an oscillating fan in the room to move the air around. The stale air is or moving air helps prevent mold and things like that from growing on your flats. It also, when your seedlings germinate, it also makes them stronger. Now you don't want to have it blowing right on them, but you kind of want the air in the room moving a little bit. Maybe when they're a little older, you can put the fan closer to them. Lights and a timer. Good lights is next to the seed starting mix. Really good lighting is your best chance for success with your seedlings. If you don't have good light, they're going to be spindly and weak, and they might not germinate at all. Having a timer is great because then you don't have to think so much about when to turn it off and on. If you're not home when it's time to turn them off and on. Certainly not absolutely necessary, but definitely something that you can invest in if you want to make your life a little easier. A permanent marker and plant labels, plastic or spun bonded horticultural fabric. Oh, pardon me. It's recording. Yeah. Sorry. Just somebody checking up on me. Plastic or spun bonded horticultural fabric. Some people call it remay. It's kind of a white see-through fabric or some kind of plastic if you don't use domes. That I like the spun bonded fabric because it's a little more porous and you don't have so much chance for mold. You can buy already made bags, or you can just fashion your own from just squares of the fabric. I'll talk a little more later about where to get that from. And you might want some little wood sticks like popsicle sticks or something like that to if you want to keep it up off the soil. Make sure if you're using previously used pots and flats, please sterilize them with a 10% bleach solution, which is like, if you have a gallon of, oh geez, that's math. I used to put a glug in there if I have a gallon of water, and just put maybe a quarter cup, half cup of bleach in there, and you don't have to be real specific, but you do want to kill any lingering creatures from the time before. Okay, here's some of the visual of some of the seed starting things. I have a little fan there. That's nice if you just have a small amount, but like if you have a lot of shelves of seeds going, then you probably want to have a oscillating room fan that'll keep the air moving around. Seed starting, now this particular seed starting mix is from Dairy Dew, which is a Michigan company. You can also, I think, there's other brands out there. I always try to go for organic, since some of these, especially if it's something you're going to be eating, if they're for your flowering perennials, I guess it's not that big of a deal. Over here is the heat mat. This one has a thermostat, and they also come without. And our grand prize, our drawing at the end is for one of these heat mats. Down here, this is a little, in this corner, the little green sprayer that is to hook onto a water bottle. And it's really handy for watering your plants. It just screws on any water bottle that you might have. It's a pretty standard sized cap, and you can water that way. And that's your freebie for tonight. And you'll be able to pick those up. We'll either have them in curbside, or you can pick them up in the library, whatever you prefer. And down in the right-hand corner, I have some peat pots. In case you're not familiar with them, that's what they look like. They're a compressed peat product that breaks down in the soil. So they're used sometimes when there are plants that don't like to have their roots disturbed. And so that's a good way to use them. But like I said, that it's best to use them for things that are going to go in the ground fairly soon. They tend to break down over time in the flat. So in most perennials, we're starting in January. So by the time you're putting them out, it's going to be quite a while. So only use peat pots for this. They're better used for your seeds that you're sowing for your vegetable garden closer to, May and times like that. The floating row cover is on the bottom middle. That's what it looks like. It's used for making little hoop houses for seed germination. It's also used for keeping insects off plants. You can get it in various amounts of shade that they, some are like 80% shade and some are 90% shade. And so you can, if you want to keep it on your plants all year round, you want to get the lightest one possible and the most shade for things that really need it. So it's really good you can kind of just lay it over your flats and until they germinate to kind of help keep some of the moisture in, but yet they let air in too. So it's not as stagnant, I guess, inside as you would have with the plastic dome. And moving over to the right, to the left of that is a dome setup. It's a flat with some cell packs and then the dome that goes on the top. That's really nice. You can buy those as kits in stores. If you've been gardening for a while and you've kept your flats and things from your purchases, which I always do, and keep those stacked up in your garage or barn or shed, and then you've got them for when you need them for starting seeds. You could also use, there's bigger cell packs up above. These are about 3-inch square. And they usually come in like a little 6-pack and they fit 6 to a flat. And then you can also get, 4-inch pots and 3-inch pots that are single pots. It's whatever you want to use when you're starting your plants, and whatever you've got too. Sometimes when germinating seeds, you can, if you take a 4-inch pot or even a 6-inch pot, you can sprinkle them around in there. And after they germinate and grow a little bit and get their real leaves, then you can pop them out into a bigger pot. So there's different ways you can do it. Or you could start just one in each cell of the cell pack. So however you like to do it. I can't overstress how important it is to label your plants. Even if you think you're going to remember, you probably won't. Sharpie's a good brand to use. There are other permanent markers too. Sharpies are what I've always used. Sometimes they fade out in the sun, but for the purposes of starting seeds indoors, they really work well. I can also I have seed marker or seed labels that I can add to your goodie bag with your little sprayer too, if you so request. Okay, lighting. Seedlings do best with 16 hours a day. Sometimes people do 18. 12's kind of skimpy, but you could probably get by with it. You want vigorous, sturdy seedlings, and if they're stretching and reaching for more light, they're going to just be spindly and pale. So, and a lot of people like to put them on a windowsill. Windowsills are great if they get sun all day. If you have a good southern exposure and it gets sun most of the day, you might be able to get away with using windowsill. Trouble is, in this time of the year, we really don't have 16 hours of good daylight. So, and a lot of our days are kind of gray and dreary. So usually windowsill light isn't quite enough for good stocky seedlings. Also being close to the window, if you're trying to keep them warm, you know, it can be a little bit chilly up next to the glass. If you do use a windowsill, if that's your only option, then you probably would want to rotate the flat every day so that a different side is next to the glass. That gives them a little, you know, the ones next to the glass are going to get the most light. So if you can flip them around, that works. Incandescent bulbs generally produce too much heat, and they use a lot of electricity, and they don't have a broad spectrum of light. So generally not used really for seed starting at all. Fluorescent or LEDs are more popular. So, you know, the fluorescents are probably might be less expensive. They're still available. Those big old shop lights that you can buy at the big box stores work very well. Sometimes you can use just with the bulbs that come with them, or you can swap out one for a warm bulb, so you can have both warm and cool light bulbs in there. That gives you a little bit broader spectrum. Seedlings have to be within 3 or 4 inches of the lights. So and we'll talk about this in a minute, but you have to have some way of either lifting your seedlings up to the light, or you know, having the lights come down to them, maybe on a chain or something from the fixture. LED grow lights cost more to buy, but they use a lot less electricity, and they last much longer than fluorescent fixtures. The light intensity is stronger, so you may not have to have them so close to the seedlings. And I'm just starting to use LEDs, so I haven't had a lot of personal, I guess, experience with them. I've been using fluorescents all along, but you know, those who use them say they're really great. Now LEDs come in various forms. The next slide, we can talk a little bit more about them. I'm going to pause here because there is a question. Can you use egg cartons to start seedlings? Well, egg cartons are very shallow, so you're probably going to, they don't hold much dirt, so you're probably going to have to move them out of the egg carton and into something else relatively quickly. And if it's the egg cartons that are made of a compressed paper type product, they, like the peat pots, they'll probably break down fairly quickly. They're best used for something that you're going to grow really fast and pop in the ground relatively quickly. And perennials that you're starting in January really don't fall into that that category. Miracle Grow potting mix. If you have if they have a seedling mix, that's okay. Some people, I don't know if they have an organic mix available. Their regular potting mix would probably work. I don't think I would get the one that has the added fertilizer in it because you don't want to fertilize your tiny little seedlings. As far as when starting them, we're going to cover all that later in the program. Okay, back to lighting. Here are some kind of deluxe, these two large pictures on the bottom. These are ready-made fixtures that you can buy from catalogs or in stores. They're very, I guess you could say, expensive. This big one in the middle it runs up, just almost to $1,000. So that's kind of out of reach for most of us for a hobby. If you're really, really into it and you can justify it and you're going to use it for years and years and years, then that it's an awesome investment, but certainly not necessary. And after we finish with this slide, the next one is going to show some more, I guess, homemade.
Not, so I don't know. She was stuck in the waiting room. But I don't see her
Oh,
now.
sorry. Supposedly someone's in the waiting room, but she must be in a different waiting room.
Just keep an eye out. and see if
Okay,
she pops
yeah.
up here.
No, I've been letting everybody in. Sorry about that. So in the top, it kind of shows the top middle slide shows two fluorescent fixtures side by side for a total of 4 bulbs. That really works nice. And then you can slide your plants in kind of perpendicular to the lights? Yeah, I'm using the right word. Kind of, and then again, and this one right here is a shop, again, just a regular old shop light you can buy at the store. These are some individual lights. They're just sitting on top of the dome. If that's all you're going to do is 1 or 2 little flats, you can get by with that. This one on the other side is an LED light that is shaped like a fluorescent light, and it fits in fluorescent fixtures. That's what I'm going to be trying to use this year for the first time. I'll let you know next year how it worked. But yeah, there's, basically you just want to have as much light as possible on these seedlings. Now this next slide is kind of some more homespun types of things that you can do. We'll start up in the upper left-hand corner and go clockwise. But this one is a windowsill, but they've also, as you can see, added the additional light of a fluorescent fixture over them. And and they've got them on a table or something up next to the windowsill. Windowsills, especially in more modern houses, are very small. So chances are you won't be able to set anything on them of any size. So you can push a little table up or mount a shelf there. But you can see that they hung a fluorescent fixture over it to give it extra light. Middle top is just a kind of a fixture setup that is where they've got them hanging from the ceiling or from something up above, maybe some sort of structure, and the lights are just hanging. And when you do it this way, you can raise and lower the lights over the, as needed. As the plants grow, you can raise them up a little bit. This one here just shows, they've used the underside of a rolling cart and mounted a fluorescent or LED fixture on it. And that's great if you just have 2 or 3 flats. Right here, this is kind of looks like a garage setup with PVC pipe and maybe some shelving from the hardware store, and the lights are suspended from the PVC pipe, and it's a whole structure that goes up higher than is shown here. But again, something that's, and you can use wood, make a wooden shelf. You can just set them on a table and make a little structure, hold the lights, or just suspend the lights from the ceiling. Lots of things you can do. On this one, when I mentioned earlier about tabletop, you can get these types of LED fixtures, and they're usually clamp onto something, and they've got one or everything from 1 to like 3 or 4 of these little lights that come up, and they can be, the stem of them, I guess you could say, can be bent to where you want them. If you just have maybe one flat, those might work. They don't put out as much a light compared to a fluorescent or LED full-size fixture. But if you just have a handful of of little pots or one flat, you could probably get by, and especially if you clamped it on by the windowsill and it was supplemental light for light that they're getting from the outside. These are really inexpensive, so it might get you through. It might be the solution if you're just doing a very small amount of seedlings. And this last one here is a rolling rack from Costco or Sam's Club. I think they both sell them. They can be used with or without casters. You can just mount the lights on the underside of the shelf, and they'll shine on the shelf below. This one shows them mounted with chains, so they could move them up and down as needed. I have that set up amongst others in my basement, so that it works really well. And if you can get 2 light fixtures on each shelf, that gives you a lot of light for your seedlings. Okay, we're going to talk about basic seed starting. I'm going to do a quick check for no more questions right now. Good, just go on to this. Basic seed starting. If you're accomplished at starting your vegetable seeds, you usually start in February or March, even April. If you're already doing that, you've got a little bit of a head start from a total beginner. But in this particular thing, we're talking about perennials, and perennials, they come from all over the world, and depending on where they're from is how, as the means by which you get them to germinate depends on where they're from. I guess you could say that you have to start them really early, because a lot of them need some kind of special treatment to mimic their homeland. So if you start them early, because some of them need cold treatment, sometimes for weeks or even months. So you have to start them now to get them through all that, so that they are big enough to plant by the time we can start planting here in Michigan. You want to start with moist soil before planting your seeds. That kind of gives you a leg up. If your soil's dry, a lot of, when you buy potting soil from the store, it has often a wetting agent in it. And so it'll still be moist when you buy it, and it will accept moisture very readily. If you have soil that you kept in a bag from last year, it could be very dry. And you might want to start the day before you plan to plant your seeds in order to get that going, because once potting soil dries out, especially if it has a lot of peat in it, it takes a long time to get it reconstituted, I guess you could say, so that you can plant your seeds in it. So, you'd want to put it in a bin or like a dish pan or something like that, mix water with it. And if you use warm water or hot water, that really helps. It seems to accept it better, and let it soak overnight and keep stirring it. So, and don't use it if it's still, because it kind of almost repels water when it's gotten super dry. So you want to make sure that it's accepting water again, because if you plant your seeds in it before you get it reconstituted, your seeds could dry out rapidly and you won't even realize it, because sometimes it looks moister than it is. So definitely make sure you've got new potting soil or new seed starting soil, or that what you saved from the year before is still moist. If it's not, get it that way. You can plant your seeds in any way you want. You can plant them in individual pots with just 2 or 3 seeds a pot, or you can take like a 6-inch pots and put several seeds in it spaced apart, or plant them individually in a cell pack with maybe, so you're only intending on having 1 plant per cell. Always put 2 or 3 seeds for every one that you want to start, because that way, if you just put 1 in there and it doesn't germinate, then then you've got a blank pot. It's better to thin them to 1 than to not have a blank one. Tiny fine seeds can just be pressed on the surface of the soil. If you bury those down 1/8 or 1/4 inch deep, then they're probably not going to they just won't find their way out. And some seeds are like dust. You can barely see them. They're so fine. Many seeds that we're going to be talking about tonight need light to germinate. And so they just get pressed on the surface and into the moist soil, and you don't put anything else on top of them. If you have larger seeds that you will be placing in the soil, you put them in the soil about twice the width of the seed itself, which means if it's a good sized seed, you're probably going to put it in a 1/4 inch or even a 1/2 inch. The bigger the seed, the deeper you plant it. Some seeds need darkness to germinate. They don't germinate well in light. So that things like that should be on the individual. If you buy a seed packet or get one from the seed library, it will have that information on it. You push them in, of course, with your finger, or you can use an unsharpened pencil or the end of a marker to press them into the soil. That it gives you a little bit more control over than well, I have fat fingers, so. After you get your seeds on, even though your soil is moist, you're going to want to water them again so that the moisture in the soil makes good contact with the seed. Use a very soft spray, because with fine seeds, it's easy to just wash them right out of the pot. Or the best way to do that is to set the pot in a flat that doesn't have drainage holes and let them soak up water from the bottom. At least until the plant, they kind of rooted in and got themselves situated. After you plant the seeds, you can put them right under the lights unless they need further treatment or require darkness to germinate. Sometimes you just might want to set the flat somewhere else until they germinate, and then put them under the lights. But a lot of plants need light to germinate, so you'll want to get them under the lights right away. The clear plastic domes, I'm not always a big fan of those, even though they come with all seed starting kits pretty much. You just want to make sure that if you're using windowsill gardening, don't put them where direct sunlight's going to hit them, because they heat up very fast inside and you can cook your seeds or your little seedlings. One thing you can do is, what you're trying to achieve by putting the dome on is to keep the moisture in so the seeds don't dry out especially if you're gone during the day. So if you're using a dome, I don't recommend you use windowsill gardening, because even if you've got them in a west window and in the morning you leave for work and you come back in the afternoon and the sun's blasting in that window, you might be, you might be done for with your seed starting in that dome, under that dome. One thing you can do is keep the dome on maybe at night to help keep the warmth in, and in the daytime take it off. So because the seeds really need some air circulation in there. When you're using a dome, watch carefully for mold. It really loves that nice, moist, warm little climate that's underneath that dome. So like I said, you can, if you don't want to use a dome, you can use a piece of plastic like Glad wrap or Saran wrap and just kind of lay it over the flat. You don't have to tuck it in really, just kind of lay it over it so that it's loose and air can get in. Same with a floating row cover. If you have some of that, you can definitely cut it up into flat sized pieces and just lay it over the top. And then if you want to raise it off, like I said, you can use little popsicle sticks or something, anything, a little plastic fork, whatever, get little things that you can use to lift it up a little bit off of the flat. Just watch for germination, because as soon as things germinate, you want to move that whatever cover you've got off. Whoops. Okay. Here's a little bit of a visual aid. Check them a couple of times a day for germination. Perennials, unlike the beans and things like that, or tomato seeds or things like that sprout sometimes within just less than a week. Perennials can take a long time. And it can be erratic. You can have 12 seeds in a pot and 3 will germinate, and then a week later 2 more will. So and times differ. Some jump up in a week and some might not germinate for weeks. So you can usually that might be on the seed packet, or you can look it up to see, but with perennials, they don't always just leap out of the soil. So up in the center top, that they're planting their seeds in individual pots, 3 to a pot. And with perennials, that's a great way to do it, because otherwise, you're going to have to break them up and put them in bigger pots eventually. At least they start out. And then if all 3 seeds come up, then you can just thin to the strongest one, take the other 2 out. Now I know that hurts, but it's much better for the plant. You're going to have a better outcome for that one strong seedling than 3 that are fighting for nutrients and light and space. And so in the upper corner, definitely you can lay the seeds right, or the seeds can be, some of them need to be right on the surface. So you just lay them on the surface and kind of press them in a little bit. Down below that's just a seed packs in that actually looks like broccoli or cabbage or something like that. But the process is still the same. If you start a bunch of them in into one container, and when they get to be a certain size, you have to take them out individually and put them in a cell so they can grow on. And that way they can, get the size they need to be. If you left them in a container like that one there, the green one, that they're eventually they're going to get so spindly, they're going to be all competing for light and everything, that none of them will be good seedlings. And on the bottom corner, it's a nice little graphic of the different stages of germination. At the far left is one that's just come out of the ground. It hasn't even opened up. His little seed, his seed is just seed. It's basically a seed with a stem coming out of it. And the next one is the seed is starting to open up, and the little actual little plant that's inside is starting to unfurl. And then he'll straighten up, and then his little leaves, his first leaves will start coming out. And then these are called true leaves. These will eventually fall off, these clunky ones. And these are the true leaves that'll look like the eventual plant. And once they get true leaves, then you can transplant them into their own pots. And that's when you can start fertilizing them if you feel you need to. We'll talk about fertilizer in a bit. Watering, we talked about that a little bit. Bottom water them if possible, especially fine seeds. Over in the corner is a little bulb mist, just one of those little bulb misters that just hook onto a water bottle. You can use dish detergent bottles, things like that. And even the dish detergent bottles with their original top on them will work, because you can set it to hardly anything coming out and just control how much water you're putting in. If you have a greenhouse, you can, and you water with a hose, you can get a misting attachment for the hose that just puts out a fine mist instead of, because those types of hoses will really wash your seedlings out if you let them. Seeds and seedlings, if they dry out, that can be the end of them. So you don't want to overwater, but you also have to be vigilant that you don't underwater either. Because if they aren't getting enough water, they're not able to draw up nutrients and they just won't grow. Overwatering, you can actually drown them. And it also is an invitation for mold or algae. Fertilizing isn't necessary until seedlings have true leaves. And fertilizing for perennials isn't super necessary anyway. You can do a little bit of fertilizing, but you want to, maybe if by the dosage, cut it in half and only do it half as often. You want the roots of your perennials to grow strong and be reaching for its food. If the food is offered to it readily, then they're not going to grow a good root system, because why should they? Because everything's just flowing right over them all the time. So just bare minimum of fertilizing. Once you pot them up into the pot they're going to be in until you plant them, you can use a couple of little balls of control of time release fertilizer. They look like tiny little balls, or you can use, like I said, a half strength fertilizer, half as often as you would normally fertilize something. Don't stress out about fertilizer, and some potting soils have it already in it. So that's something you want to be aware of too, because if your potting soil already has it in it, you don't want to be adding anymore, because you can over fertilize that way. Okay, now we're going to kind of start talking about the nitty gritty. We covered the basic seed starting, but since we're talking about perennials, a lot of them have very specific requirements. And I've kind of grouped them into groups of what they require to get going. But we're going to talk about a few terms that we're going to be using in the rest of the program. Now, a perennial, as you probably know, is a plant that overwinters in its appropriate zone. There are lots of plants that we grow in Michigan as annuals that are really perennials if you're in Southeast Asia or Florida, or but a true perennial it's only perennial here when it can make it through the winter. And it comes back from year to year. And there are things called short-lived perennials. They're perennials that go really nice for about 3 or 4 years, and then they start to peter out, and then you can replace them. An annual is a plant that completes its life cycle in one season, from seed to seed. You start the seed and it sets seed before the end of the season, most likely. A biennial is a plant that grows vegetation the first year and flowers the following year. I bring biennials up because I have a few that we're going to discuss that if you're very clever, you might be able to get them to flower their first year if you can trick them into thinking they've been through a winter. To stratify or stratification is providing a cold period required for a seed to germinate. And vernalizing is providing a cold period required for a plant to flower. So once you get a plant to germinate, it still may need a cold season to flower. And that's basically a biennial. A biennial needs that cold winter in order to shoot up its seed stalk and flower. Scarify or scarification is nicking or wearing down the seed coat to speed up germination. Pre-soaking is soaking the seed before you plant it, and so that it softens the seed coat and makes it go faster. Hardening off, or to harden off plants. When you are getting ready to plant your new little seedlings outside, be they perennials or annuals or biennials, if they've been inside their whole life, they're going to be very tender. And sometimes they call it growing soft. And so when you just can't take a plant like that and plop it out in the garden and expect it to do well, it's going, because it's not used to wind, and it's not used to full sun, and it's not used to the temperature fluctuations. So we'll talk about a little bit more later, but we'll talk about all these things a little bit more later. Somebody said, I use domes, but they have a ventilation window. Definitely. Yeah, that's if you're going to use a dome, that's the type to have. Some of the kits, they don't have those, but ventilation is important. So thank you for mentioning that. Am I a master gardener? No, I'm not. I've been raising children and working, and I've just never gotten to take the class. But I've been a gardener since basically was born. My parents were gardeners, so I picked up a lot along the way. And I was gardening long before the internet, so I read a lot of books before we could look everything up the new fashioned way. Pre-soaking seed. That's one of the most common and easiest ways to prepare your seeds. Some seeds, like, you can't really pre-soak. I mentioned earlier that some seeds are very fine and dusty. Well, pre-soaking those is literally impossible, because you're just going to have dust floating on the top of the water. And then and usually those small seeds don't need it. That's not part of their growing process. But some seeds have a very hard coat on them, a very thick seed coat. And so soaking can help soften those seed coats. And sometimes the seed coat has chemicals in it to keep it from germinating, and soaking can remove those chemicals. Or their hormones, things like that. So, that's another thing soaking can do, is help remove those. Seeds that need to be scarified, which means when you cut into the seed coat to open it up a little bit, usually soaking them first makes that easier. And you might not even have to if they soak well enough. When you're soaking seeds, use room temperature water unless the instructions say otherwise. Sometimes people do soak them in hot water briefly, but that's pretty rare. And most of the things I can't think of anything we're talking about it tonight that needs a hot water treatment. Just be aware that is a thing. If you get into some oddball type of perennials, and you're going to find a lot of these things are often seeds like tree seeds and things like that. So that, most of these perennial seeds don't require too much pre-soaking. Usually the soaking period is just overnight. You don't want to soak them for too long, or they might, they don't get enough oxygen, and it could actually start rotting. So usually overnight's enough, 8 to 12 hours is good enough. Now, some bigger seeds may soak up all the water that you put in them. So you kind of want to check them off and on to see if you need to add a little bit more water. And then when you're ready to plant your seeds, you can drain them. And if they're hard to handle, you can knock them out onto a towel or a paper towel and kind of let them drain a little bit so that they're easier to handle. Now, pre-soaking is not the same as pre-sprouting. They can go hand in hand, but one is not the other. Pre-soaking is just to soften the seed coat. Pre-sprouting is when you actually soak the seed and then put it in a moist environment so you can see if they are going to sprout again or if they're viable. I use that sometimes. I pre-sprout seeds sometimes for beans and things like that because they're so big. And if you pre-sprout them so that they're little, they're just starting to germinate, you're just starting to see them open up, then you put them in the ground and it knocks a day or two off of their germination time. But pre-soaking for our purposes tonight is not pre-sprouting. So we're going to talk about scarification. That's seeds that have that thick coating we talked about a minute ago. It basically is there to inhibit germination until the conditions are favorable for growth. And most of the seeds that need that are from trees and wild plants. And they don't want to just, like a tree doesn't want to drop its seeds and have them just germinating willy-nilly right next to them, because then it'll be competition. Often, when you see that they're chemicals they use to scarify seeds, that's because the seed probably would have been eaten by an animal and then excreted elsewhere. And that's a way of the plant has of actually moving itself around. But going through the digestive system and the acid and everything, that actually, takes a seed that won't germinate and makes it so it will, because it's been through that chemical process. On there's trees, especially, I think there's some kinds of conifers that they won't germinate till after a forest fire. So those seeds possibly could lay in the pine cone for years until, an event such as a forest fire. Similar to flooding, there are some areas of the world that flood regularly, but the rest of the time they're super dry. So those seeds have adapted by, they have that thick coat. It keeps them protected, and so that they won't germinate until they get soaked in that flooding water. And then when the floods recede, then they germinate. So it's very interesting when you kind of go back and look at why these plants have these requirements. Commercial facilities, that do seeds, they can use chemicals and hormones, and sometimes they use heat and hot water because they're doing large number of seeds, or sometimes they use hot water treatment, acid, gibberellins. Those are all things that even advanced hobbyists might use. For us in our more or less beginners world, we usually scarify seeds by nicking their seed coat, and often before or after pre-soaking. Usually after, because after they're softened up a little bit, it's easier to nick them. So scarification is that process of nicking the seed coat to get a little tiny opening there that makes the plant germinate more quickly. You can use files, scissors, nail clippers, sandpaper. And the next slide, I'm going to show you where not to nick the plant. As soon as you do that process, you want to plant your seeds into soil, because they should be planted immediately. So starting up in the upper left, that's some kind of like X-Acto knife, and they're just slicing off just a little bit of the seed. Just so, and then the seed ends up looking like this. It's just a little nick. You don't want to cut into the seed that's underneath. You just want to nick off the seed coat. And the radical that we're talking about is when most seeds have a little indentation in them, and the radical is where the seed is going to open up when it's germinating. So you don't want to put the nick there. You want to put the nick on the other side somewhere. Oops, sorry about that. I got to go back over on this side. So that's and don't be afraid, but like I said, just do it very carefully because you don't want to cut into the seed. You just want to just do the outer coating. You can use a finger clip or fingernail clippers. You can use a little file and just kind of rub them on the file. That probably gives you a very controlled, because you're just weakening the seed coat at that point. And then sandpaper, same thing, just rub them across, or you can have 2 pieces of sandpaper and just kind of put the seeds in between and give them a little treatment there, just enough to weaken that seed coat. Not a terrible lot of perennials that we're going to be discussing tonight need this, just a handful, but you just need to be aware of it and not be afraid of it if it's something you need to do. Stratification, or to stratify plants, is a pre-chilling method. You'll see that in plants native to northern climates like ours. Most Michigan native perennials need a process of stratification or pre-chilling before they germinate. A handful don't, but most of them do. We're going to go over methods of chilling. You can plant after the chilling period. If they're not already in soil, plant them in soil and grow on as required. Once you take them off, or once they've gone through their chilling period, it's good to put them on heat mats if you have them, or put them in a warm area. If you have your light set up in a warm room, a room that stays pretty warm, that might work too. But it simulates the fact that, like, okay, I've been chilling all winter. Now spring is here, and it's have that period of warmth after the period of cold will stimulate the plants to grow. Here's different methods of stratifying. Some seeds, you can just refrigerate them how they come in the seed packet, or if you've gathered the seeds yourself, you can put them in a packet and then put them inside a plastic bag, and just put them in the freezer or the refrigerator. It depends on, most refrigerator usually does it for most of them. Lavender is one that pops into mind. And then, again, that will sometimes be and that's just the dry seed that you're doing nothing but drying the seed. Some perennials, the seed doesn't remain viable for very long. So it's definitely a good idea to refrigerate those, and so that they kind of suspend their aging process a little bit. One of the things you can do is place the seeds in a moist paper towel. Now, when I say moist, not dripping wet, you'd want to, if you get the paper towel wet, then kind of wring it out gently. Put the seeds on that paper towel, fold it up and put it in a bag, usually a plastic bag or a baggie, and then refrigerate. And then after the chilling period, you just take them out and plant them in soil like you normally would. Or if you have doing the paper towel method is the least messy to have in your refrigerator, and also you can get a lot of seeds in that way. If you're doing a lot of seeds, you can also plant them in moist soil already in your little pots or cell packs. Put them inside a bag and refrigerate. I have visuals for all this in the next slide, so don't worry. I'll kind of go over it again. There's a quickie method of, you can fill an ice cube tray halfway and put the seeds on it so that they freeze in the lower half, and then put a little bit more water on the top to cover the seeds, and just leave that ice cube tray in the freezer for about a week. This won't work for the perennials that need a very long, some of them need a cold treatment for 1 or 2 months, or maybe even 3. So you don't want to use that for those, but for some, you just may want to jump start. That's one way you can do it. you can put them in, sow them in a soil in pots or cell packs, put them inside some type of bag, and then keep them in an unheated, like a garage or a shed. An attached garage would be better because it's not going to be quite as cold as a separate building. You can put them in a cold frame for the recommended time, and then bring them back inside for germination. You sometimes rodents love it when you put out flats of seeds, because if the seeds are tasty, they'll go dig in each little cell or each little pot and dig them out and eat them. So you can always cover them with some type of screening or hardware cloth. And when I say cloth, it's just basically a wire mesh. You have to bend it to fit around whatever you're putting out there. So putting things outside is always risky. But because of the rodents, voles and things like that kind of run around underneath the snow all winter and eat things. Now the plant bags you use can be plastic, like just a Ziploc bag or a turkey bag. If it's turkey bags work great for large flats. They're kind of expensive, but you can reuse them. Perforated plastic. Sometimes you can buy those vegetable bags that are actually perforated plastic. That's awesome to use. They're not, I don't know how big they come, but if you just have a small pot or two, then you can definitely use that. Or you can create a bag from the spun bonded row cover. You can either sew up or staple each end and kind of we make a little bag to go around the flat. Sewing, stapling is much easier. With all of the above methods, you just, when they're done with their appropriate time, and please write it on your calendar when you when you put them in. Again, I think I'm going to remember things and I don't. So it's definitely right on the calendar when you put your things into their cold storage. The other option is let nature take its course. You just sow the seeds directly in the place you want them to be in the fall, before the ground freezes. And you want to clear it out of weeds, make sure the ground is well worked, and mark it well. You might want to put stones or bricks around it, and make sure it's watered. If we have a dry spell, sometimes in the winter we don't get, we'll have periods where we don't get any snow, or in this winter, I think today's the first really cold day we've had. So, you might want to keep an eye on them when they're outdoors and make sure they need some water if necessary. And again, you run the risk of little rodentia crawling around and chewing up your seeds. But if you plant enough of them, hopefully the numbers will be on your side. So here's just little visuals for stratification. This is the paper towel method. They've rolled up, this person has, put 3 or 4 different seeds. They dated them. What day they're putting them in, what they are, and put them in a plastic bag. Then you can take all your plastic bags and put them into a little, container, whatever you have, deli container, whatever, and put them in your crisper drawer and forget about them. And you might want to put a little note on the outside about when you need to pull them out. This one up in the upper right corner is the ice cube method. So putting them in there, and that's really wouldn't hurt very many seeds to do that, even if they don't require a cold treatment. If they don't, because when you go into look, you can look the same plant up from different websites and they'll all say something different. And so some will say they need heat, some say they don't, some say they need to be stratified, some say they don't. And so, there's very few seeds that would be bothered by this treatment, but you just sprinkle the seeds in some water and freeze it, and then put a little bit more water on the top to cover the seeds, especially if they're floating, and just put them in there for a week, or even a couple of days. And then you can just take the ice cube out and lay it right on top of the soil, and it's gonna just slowly melt, and it'll water your soil and deposit the seeds there at the same time. And then if they need to be pushed into the soil, you can use it, like I said, use a pencil or something to push them into the soil. If they need light to germinate, just leave them laying on top of the soil and give it a little more. The ice cube's not going to water that whole cell, so make sure you keep an eye on it for water. In the bottom right corner, we've got a man putting his seedlings in a cold frame, and he's giving them his cold treatment. Actually, those look like there are flat things growing in some of those flats, but we're going to pretend that he's putting them in there. That might keep the rodents out a little better, keep it a little safer. You do have to check on them for, and on sunny days, you might have to open it up and let some air in there because it might get too hot. But it's just a way you can do it, or you can just set them in your garage and someplace like that where they're getting their cold treatment out there. It's always good, bottom right is to if you like, looks like maybe a mushroom container from the store. You can plant your seeds in there and put them in a bag and put them in the fridge. So you just, it's nice if you have an extra fridge in your garage or your basement to put things like that in. So everybody, when they're rummaging around for their celery and their lunch meat, aren't going to be knocking your plants all over the place. Or, just devote a crisper drawer to it and put a skull and crossbones on the outside that says, "Do not enter, do not touch my seeds." Just make sure you stake your claim on your refrigerator. Now, we're going to talk about stratification first. Lot of popular perennials require stratification. Here's some that we'll go over. Most of these are pretty common. If you're not sure about what they look like, you can always look them up. It would have made 150 slides if I would have made a slide for every perennial. So I kind of didn't do that in the interest of winding this up before 10 o'clock tonight. So anyway, these are some that require possibly more than one type of pre-treatment. Like the goat's beard, you lightly cover the seeds, stratify it for 6 weeks. But the Delphinium, you have to pre-chill them and then put them in for only a week on a damp paper towel, then plant them. You can go 1/8 of an inch in, so they probably don't need light to germinate, and then give them some bottom heat. And so, you will have access to these slides and to this program via the recording after this is over with. So if you, want to go back over some of this stuff, you can definitely, it'll be available to you. So a lot of people don't realize that they can grow hostas from seed. They can, sometimes if your hostas bloom and they make a seed pod, when that seed pod has ripened and dried, you can take the seeds out. And, a lot of times with perennials like that, like especially if they're kind of juicy seeds like hosta or daylily seeds, you might want to just put them in the refrigerator just as they are until until time to plant them. It keeps them fresher longer. But sometimes you have to, like the poppy is one that you want to use a biodegradable pot, like maybe not a peat pot, but something that's like a paper pot or peat pot where you're going to, because they do not like to be transplanted. Most people with poppies, that's one that works really well if you just scatter the seeds outside and let them kind of come up in the spring after they've been through their cold period. But if again, that is does have its perils. So some people do like to start them indoors, but most of the rest of these start pretty well. like in a Russian sage, and just pointing out that they've changed the name to it. It's now classified as a salvia yangii. So here we go. It was the other name for most of our lives. But you cold treat the seed. When we talked about cold treating the dry seeds, so you do that for a while, and then you plant it in soil and chill it for another 45 days, and then you take it out and put it under the lights and keep them moist, and germination can take up to 4 months. So that's probably one of the most challenging ones that we have in this program tonight. Most of them don't have that many steps, but some do. I just put that one in there because some people love that plant. It is a really nice landscape plant, and they're expensive. And starting your plants from seeds, you can get 100 plants for the price of buying one in a gallon pot at the nursery. So it definitely pays to go through this if you want a lot of plants. And I put the little Johnny jump ups in there too. They need darkness to germinate. So you want to cover it, even though the seed is very small, you want to cover it with a 1/4 inch of oil, and then don't put it under the lights until after it germinates. And the same goes for pansies, even though they're not a perennial. And violas are violas or violas, depends on who you talk to, Johnny jump ups. They're not a really long-lived perennial, but they do, once you get them planted, they do tend to seed themselves. Pansies are more of an annual or a biannual, but you can treat them just like you can start them really early with your perennials, and they'll be ready because they can go out when it's still a little chilly. Now, a particular favorite of mine, these are all Michigan natives, and we are going to have seeds for, I think, most all of these in our seed library this year. I'm waiting. Some just need to be bagged up and or put into packages, and some I'm waiting to come in the mail. So I will keep you all abreast of that. These, so you can come and pick up your seeds when you're ready, or when they're ready. But almost all of them have a chill season. The Baptisia Alba, you want to, it only has to chill for 10 days, but it does need to be scarified first. So you want to put that, soak it, and then put a little nick in it to so that it'll germinate faster. Let's see. A couple of them don't need any chilling, the Helenium. And I think the two, at least one of the little blue stem doesn't need a chilling zone or a chilling period. The wild lupin also needs to be scarified, and any lupin seeds. The lupin seeds we're going to have in the seed library are the wild form. They're light blue color. You see them growing around Michigan at the right time of year. But pre-soaking and scarifying those is a good idea. But so anyway, these, I'll keep you updated on these seeds as they, most of these I already have. It's just, I was putting this program together. It was either put the program together or package up the seeds. So I had to pick one. So after this, I can get the seeds packaged up. So after all of that, we can kind of relax a little bit, because these are seeds that don't require a chilling period because of the part of the world that they come from. The Mediterranean region, as it's loosely called, which is, it includes south of France and Italy, and geez, I'm blanking. I can't even see the map in front of my head. Spain, Greece, Turkey, all around the Mediterranean Sea, even the north part of Africa. They have a similar the plants that originate from that area, where they have very warm, dry summers and lots of sunshine, and their soil isn't super full of humus. I didn't mean hummus. Not super full of humus, but they are more a drier soil. And then their winters are wet and mild, but the soil is very well drained, so that even the seeds that are in the soil, they're not sitting in soggy soil. And so you take that all into consideration when starting their seeds and also when planting them in the garden. A lot of these seeds like to be put in a really well-drained place. You wouldn't want to put them in kind of a low area of your yard that holds water after a rain. You might want to have some extra sand in the soil, or a sandier place, or maybe a raised place like a rock garden or something where that drains really well. All these plants do well in that sort of a situation. So we basically divided them up into two groups. And the group A is the largest group, fortunately, and they all require light to germinate and warmth. And group B is a smaller group. They don't need a chilling period, but they do need some extra steps in order to germinate. So group A is a lot of your favorite herbs are here, like lavender and lemon balm and marjoram and oregano and mint. Your culinary sage was under the, it's a salvia. So thyme. So you're going to see, wow, these are a lot. I don't have to go through the whole chilling thing with these. So what you're going to need to do, though, is give them a little bit more of warmth. So again, use a high quality, well draining soil mix. You don't want a heavy, super peaty soil that's just going to really hold a lot of water. Sometimes you can sprinkle a light coating of sand or parakeet grit on the surface of the soil to help it. And then when you press your seeds into that, actually the sand or the grit can reflect light onto the seed and increase the amount of light that the seed gets. Because a lot of the seeds for these types of plants are very small. So all of them in group A that we just looked at need light to germinate. And so you just press the seeds into the surface of the moist soil. Heat mats are highly recommended. Remember, we're trying to mimic the Mediterranean region, which with their hot, dry summers and their cold, wet winters. So, but they definitely respond to a heat mat. And again, they're around 70 degrees. You want to keep the soil moist, but not soggy. And someone asked, how often do we need to water the seeds? Well, that's why you check them a couple of times a day, is because you really there is no set period, because there's a lot of variables. It's how warm they are. If they're on a heat mat, you're going to want to check them, a couple of times a day, because they're warmer, they're going to lose some moisture through evaporation. If you've got a fan in the room or not, if you've got, so there's a lot of variables. So just definitely want to just poke your finger down in there and see how they feel. Because if you go away for the day and come back and they're super dry, and I would go so far as to say that if you have to go away for like 24 hours, you're going to, or if you're going to be gone, for all day, 10, 12, 24 hours, you might want to set them inside, give them a good watering before you go, or you can even turn off the heat mat maybe before you go. Yeah, it's not going to kill them for the heat mat to be off. And it's better that if you're not going to be there to water them, it's better to have it off than to have them dry out. So just, you kind of have to become one with the seeds and sort of, try to learn and anticipate their needs a little bit. You definitely want to keep them moist, but you don't want to keep them soggy. And we'll go in later on into what troubles that can cause. General air circulation. The plastic domes aren't really recommended for this type of plant. If you were going to go away for the day and you don't have the heat mat on, maybe you could put the dome on for the day if you had one. They like bright light because of where they are. They're closer to the equator than we are, so they have longer days. So you want them 16 to 18 hours a day of bright light. And some of the seeds take 2 or 4 weeks to germinate. Rosemary and lavender are notorious for being slow germinators. They can go up to 8 weeks. And lavender is one of the plants that benefits from when you get the seeds. If you throw them into the refrigerator right as soon as you get them, and you put the packet in a plastic bag and put them in the fridge until you sow them. The ones that I purchased for this program are already being chilled in my refrigerator at home, so they will be pre-chilled. So you can skip that step if you get lavender seeds from the seed library. Rosemary and lavender are erratic germinators. They probably will be the toughest nuts to crack of all of this group. Usually when people sell them, they are started by cuttings, because they both actually, that's a better way to, if you already have them, taking cuttings is better for increasing. But sometimes with seeds, like I said, you can start a lot of them if you don't already have one to take cuttings from. If you don't feel like your skills at taking cuttings are good enough, then definitely try to, but you could plant 100 seeds and get 5, but that's still, it's still less expensive than buying them by the pots. Here's some other no-chill seeds that they need an extra step of some sort. Like Armeria needs to be soaked overnight. Blackberry lilies, you want to plant, they're not surface, you don't surface sow those, you plant them about 1/4 inch deep. Bloom flowers, you likely cover this seed, give them bottom heat. You don't want to bury the seeds deep, but you do want to cover them. Hibiscus is a little bit tricky, and we're talking about the hardy hibiscus. We're not talking about the tropical ones. So you want to pre-soak and scarify by nicking the seed, plant them 1/4 inch deep, and give them bottom heat. Lavatera and Alba Zebrina, both pretty common garden plants. They're pretty easy to start though, but again, they don't want light to germinate. So you put them about 1/4 inch deep and give them the bottom heat. Okay, biennials. How biennials work in nature is that they flower, they drop their seeds in late summer, and they germinate and they grow a little rosette of they call it vegetative growth. The first during the fall, and that overwinters, and then in the fall or following year, they shoot up a bloom stalk and set seed. And you probably see a lot of them around and you don't even realize that because a lot of people have the weed, they call it a weed, it's actually a medicinal herb, but mullein, the big furry leaved plants that they grow a rosette in the fall, and in the spring they shoot up this tall seed stalk, sometimes 3, 4, 5 feet tall, and then we all see it there, and a lot of people don't even realize that the year before it was just a little plant in the ground. It really wasn't, because you don't really notice them until they shoot up and bloom. So most of the time you start them in midsummer if you're starting them from seed, and you set them out in the fall. and you don't expect them to bloom until the next year. And common biennials that we see all the time are hollyhocks and foxgloves. Sweet William, forget-me-nots, and Linaria are those, they sometimes call them a money plant, where they have that little dry, round seed pod on them that kind of rustles in the wind. But the reason I put them in this program is if you start them early enough, like now, and let them get going, start them in little 3-inch pots, and that when they're a few inches tall, then you put them in a cold area. You don't want to risk putting them in a freezing area, but if you have an unheated garage, or if you have a root cellar, oh man, I wish I had one of those, or a cold area like on the steps to your basement or something like that. I have a basement door that goes to the outside, and sometimes I can put things on those basement steps, and it's like a garage. If it's attached to the house, it still doesn't get freezing, but it also stays quite cold though. So, that if you can have a place like that, you can put them, or put them in the fridge with your other perennials, and then you got plants in your fridge along with seeds. Your family will love you for that. And then in early May, take them out of cold storage, start moving them outside to harden them off gradually, and then plant them in the garden. They can take you could even do it in late April, but you want to cover them if there's a frost. Now, plants that were like a biennial that was growing already outside, that overwintered naturally outside, they aren't bothered by a frost. But you're putting out plants that have been inside for quite some time. So, they're not going to be as strong and hardy as the ones that are outside. By the next year, they will be. So it's kind of a risk. It may or may not work that you can get them to bloom their first year. It may seem like more trouble than it's worth. But if you do this a couple of years in a row, they often will reseed themselves. And so that, once you get 2 years worth of them planted every year, some of them will be blooming and reseeding, and then you can let nature take its course outside. You just have to keep the weeds out of the area. Another one that you want to start usually pretty early is parsley. I'm only bringing it up because it benefits from being started early, because it's quite hardy, and once you harden it off, you can put it outside quite early in April or the beginning of May. And parsley is something that it's the kind of plant you want to start from seed, because you want a lot of it. At least I do. But if you make things like if you use it a lot in salads or whatever, however you use a lot of parsley, you can really go through it fast. I like to put it in soup. So you can, even if you're not trying to trick it, start it early so that you've got it out, because it kind of takes a while to germinate. And that's for most of your seeds that you're growing as an annual, don't take that long. That's why we don't talk about starting those seeds until our next seed starting classes in February. And that's for most of your garden vegetables and annual flowers. But parsley likes to go early, and it likes to be pre-soaked. So definitely get that going along with your perennials, even though it's not a perennial. It is a biennial. And if you leave it in your garden and don't pull it up, it will grow very early the next year, and you can use it for cooking, and then it'll shoot up a seed stalk, and you will never need to buy parsley again, because the seed stalk will seed around and parsley will be coming up all over. And that's a good thing. It can become a weed, but you can pull it up and eat it. So once you let your parsley go to seed, you're a lucky person. Artichokes are this is again, probably a lot of people might think it's more trouble than they're worth, because they are, you have to jump all these hoops to get them to bloom the first year. Now in California, they can make it through the winter and it's no big deal, but we're in Michigan, so we have to trick it into thinking that it's been through winter. So you plant the seeds now in January, about a 1/4 inch deep in a 1 quart to 1 gallon pot. You want to make sure it's a tall pot, not a short squatty one, as tall as you can get, because they do grow quite a taproot. Give them some bottom heat, and they usually germinate fairly quickly and grow fairly quickly. So when they get to be about 10 inches tall, you vernalize them, which again, that means that you're giving them a cold period so that they will flower. So so you want to give them, maybe 6 weeks in the cold. And I have, you don't want to have them freeze solid, but you want to put them someplace where they think they're having a winter, such as it is in artichoke land, winter that's not that cold. But refrigerator is fine. You can put them in an unheated garage as long as it doesn't freeze. And you can always bring them in at night if it's kind of, by this time it's going to be, by the time they get to be 10 inches tall, it's probably going to be March or April. And we're not going to be getting at that point too many like bitter cold nights. And so you can usually leave them in an unheated area pretty safely. Then in early May, plant in the garden. Artichokes you want to plant in the garden 3 feet apart. They get very large, and they are basically a big old thistle. And so they're kind of pokey. So you don't want to put them right next to the path where you're going to brush against them, put them back a little bit. Again, because they've been indoors, throw something over them if it looks like it's going to frost. They can take a cool night, down to freezing, but you want them to keep growing. But once they're planted in the soil, they're going to take off and grow pretty fast. Artichokes have a lovely big, well, if you've seen an artichoke in the store, that is basically the bud. And if you were to leave that artichoke on the plant, it'll open up in this huge thistle about, I don't know, it can be 8 inches, 10 inches across on some varieties. It's a gorgeous thing. And some people let them go to seed, or, let them, don't even pick them to eat just because they love the lovely thistles that they grow. They're quite magnificent. And I don't do them every year, but I have done them successfully. And it's always kind of a point of pride when you kind of trick them into blooming. And there's also some edible perennials, so we don't want to forget about. Asparagus are quite easy to start from seed. Traditionally, people buy roots that are 2 or 3 years old and plant those. But if you're willing to wait, for a very inexpensive amount of money, you can make a lot of asparagus plants. You just plant them 4 inches, a 1/4 inch deep in 3-inch pots. Maybe put 2 seeds per pot, maybe 3, and you want to thin them to 1 when you're done. And again, you can put them out fairly early, as long as you watch for frost. You don't want anything you put out, or, even if it's a hardy plant, if it's been inside, it's not going to be frost hardy. But you can put them out when you're ready. I'd say the beginning of May in Michigan. We still might get a frost, but you can throw something over them. Lovage is like a celery on steroids. If you don't know what it is, it looks like a very large celery plant. The leaves are very similar. The taste is kind of similar, except that it's a perennial. And it can get 6 feet tall easily, even taller sometimes. So you want to give that one too, put it in a place where it can, it's not a tiny little herb, it's a big herb. It's short-lived, it'll grow for 4, 5, 6 years, and then all of a sudden it'll just like, I'm tired, I'm done. So periodically you do need to replace them. Rhubarb, again, most people grow them from, they buy roots or they get a division off of somebody else's, but you can start them from seeds. And there's some varieties that are more that are better for starting from seeds than others. They grow a little faster. Again, 1/4 inch deep, 3-inch pot, provide bottom heat, and then transplant into a larger container if necessary, if it's not time to plant them outside yet. Strawberries have very small seeds. You definitely want to, if you have strawberry seeds that you've purchased, you want to put them in the refrigerator in a plastic bag until you're ready to plant them. They do tend to like that treatment. They germinate a lot better. Sorrel, if you're not familiar with sorrel, it's a leafy green. Gosh, just what does it look like? I kind of like lettuce and maybe like a romaine lettuce. It's got a sour taste. It comes up very early in the spring. It's one of the first spring greens that you can eat. It's sour. And you don't want to overdo it with it. Like if you can put a few leaves in a salad, it is high in oxalic acid. So it's not something that you want to eat like a whole giant salad of it. It's more of something you add to it. Or a lot of people make sorrel soup, which is kind of, I like things that have a sour flavor. So definitely sorrel is a great, and once you get it going again, it'll stay out in your garden for quite some time. Passion fruit I put here. There are a couple of varieties that are marginally hardy in Lower Michigan. So, I know people who have planted them right up next to their house so that, where it, there's a little bit of residual heat from the foundation of the house. You can also just bring them in and put them under lights in your basement or something in the winter time too. If you're a little, just keep them growing in a pot instead of planting them in the ground. When you're starting from seed, you can experiment. You'll have enough seeds so that you can try some of both, leave a couple out to see if they make it over the winter, but you still brought a couple in. So you've kind of hedge your bet a little bit. Roselle is a type of hibiscus. It's grown in the United States. It's grown mostly for its red flowers for tea. In India, it's known as gongura. I hope I'm saying that right for our Indian friends that might be listening. I'm trying. It's got a very sour leaf, and so it's a fully edible plant. In India, they use it in a lot of dishes. And so I've always tried to have them in the seed library because, there's the people that want them for the flowers that they can make tea with or they make jelly with, because their flowers are really, a tight little bract. But bringing them the flower, if you're growing them for cooking for the leaves, then it's not so important to get them started super early. But if you want those flowers, they need a long growing season. So I put them in here, and they are a perennial. We're not in a cold place like Michigan, but they can be grown as a perennial in other parts of the world where they're native to. And they're grown, I think, in in India, some parts of Africa. And so it's in much more well-known there than it ever is in the United States. So anyway, start the seeds early. They're not hard to start. It's basically like starting a tomato seed. You plant them in pots, provide bottom heat, and they grow. You just want to have them a pretty good size before you put them outside. So most of these in this group germinate fairly quickly. And then like I said, if they get to be too large and it's still not time to put them outside, you might want to move them up to a larger container. So what could go wrong? The most treacherous time for seedlings is when they first germinate. There is a disease called damping off that definitely you want to watch out for. It usually happens when there's not enough light, not enough warmth, or maybe too much warmth. I guess it could have the opposite effect too, extremes either way. And air circulation is, because it's actually a bacteria that get, basically just the top slide is damping off, and basically they just grow very sickly right at the base, just above the seed, and then the little seedling just topples over. So the best thing to do, sometimes if you have a whole flat of something and damping off starts in one part, you can kind of scrape that off and save the rest. Yeah, if you catch it fast enough, but it can move rapidly through your flat of seeds. Spindly seedlings, that's the bottom slide. That's caused by not enough light or planting too close together and crowding. So the best thing to do is to thin your seeds right after germination so that they aren't competing for light. And like I said, good light is so important. And like if you have fluorescent fixtures, you've got to have them down close to the seedlings, within an inch or two of the seedlings sometimes. To LEDs, maybe not so close. I can't speak too much to that because I'm not as familiar with growing with those. I am going to start this year, so I'm going to have gain a little more knowledge about that and experience as time goes on. And really that is what gardening is gaining experience and making mistakes. And so spindly seedlings, don't let them get like that. Once they're tall like this, there might not be any saving them. You might be better off just to start over. And if you do start over, use new potting soil and sterilize all of your equipment with bleach water, a 10% solution. Now mold is something else that you might find growing on your, and algae too. Algae comes from being too wet and not draining well. And sometimes if with some of these perennials, you're growing them inside for so long that it just sort of happens. And you can mold and algae aren't necessarily a death sentence. If you can get to it soon, correct whatever's causing it, and kind of pick it out, get tweezers or your fingers and just pull out the mold or the algae and get it, just get down and dirty with it and get it out of there. And maybe you want to add some parakeet grit or something to the top of the soil so that it's not as friendly as an environment for those things. But sometimes if it gets too far out of hand, again, just throwing it out and starting over is sometimes the only thing you can really do. So growing on. So I've been talking about hardening off. It's really important for any seedling, be it that you've grown indoors, whether you've bought it from the nursery and brought it home and it's been in a greenhouse, or whether you started it by seed yourself indoors. So you can rush it or not, depending on what time of the year it is. But over a period of a week or two, haul those seedlings out, put them in a protected area where, sometimes on the steps of the house where they got a little protection, or out under a tree or someplace where they're not getting beat by the full sun right away. And every day you leave them out a little longer. Every day you move them into the sun a little farther, if they're sun-loving plants. If they're not sun-loving plants, then you don't want to put them in the sun. Most perennials are sun-loving plants. Some tolerate shade more than others. But yeah, for the most part, perennials love full sun. If you it gets to be May and you go, well, my seedlings are so little, I really can't put them into a pot and put them outside. So you want to put them in a bigger pot, maybe grow them outside, harden them off and put them outside, but leave them in their pot so you can make sure they're getting plenty of love and care and water that they need. And then, maybe you just grow it in that pot for the rest of the summer and put it in the ground in late summer or early fall. That gives it, if you do it in early fall, then it gives it like September, October to put to root into the ground really nicely. In anything you put in the ground, keep it watered and weed free for the first year, especially. Once they become well established, they can take the rigors of outdoors and, maybe not getting watered all the time. But when they're first put out, then you want to baby them a little bit. And again, don't overdo the fertilizer. You want to encourage them to put down deep roots, especially once they're planted outside. So if you want to give them a little shot once in a while, that's fine. Definitely don't fertilize them later, as you're going late summer and fall, because you don't want them putting on a bunch of soft new growth when at the time of year when they're supposed to be hardening up and getting ready for winter. So if you're going to fertilize, do it earlier in the year and stop doing it later. Okay, I've got a few resources here. And one of them is our website for LTPL Grows. There's Prairie Moon Nursery they basically sell native plants for the United States, but their website's an excellent resource for a lot of the seeds that we talked about tonight. Seedsavers.org has a seed starting all of their things are pretty good. I didn't put it on here, but Mother Earth News' website has a lot of gardening information too. And if you have any questions or you want to find out, if you need me to find out something for you, because there's plenty that I don't know either, but I learn a lot from looking stuff up for other people. So that's my email address. Do not, hesitate to shoot me an email about something if you need to know. So that's kind of the end of the program, but we do have our little drawing. I don't, if you have any other questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. I think I'm going to stop the recording right now, so people watching this in the future won't have